on. I can catch up later on. Welcome then. So this is session 2 of our 3-part session. So if you haven't watched the first session, which is about an introduction to digital accessibility, so you would have seen on my email, it is on our YouTube page. You can go back and watch that if you really want to. So this is meant to be a continuation from that. So what we're meant to be doing is, we're meant to be kind of moving on from where you maybe have started off your digital accessibility journey, starting off with the 5 sort of basic principles that I introduced in the first session. I will quickly go and do a recap on those just in case you weren't here, and then we're going to start to build up this journey a little bit. The whole idea is it's making it as very simple and user-friendly as everyone could possibly get to, because obviously I know with accessibility, and whether you watch something, listen to something, read something on accessibility, can become very, very text heavy. It could become very sort of jargon sort of led, despite obviously the ironic sort of connection that actually we should be avoiding that sort of thing. So I've tried to do this as a more sort of user-friendly way of looking at things. All right. So without further ado, we'll get started. So last week's session, and like I said, was not to provide you with like long lists of things. It was a very quick, simple, user-friendly pick up and use guide on what you can do for accessibility. Okay, I'm going to take that a bit further today, looking at the project management side of stuff. Now, I don't mean you have to be a project manager. That's definitely not what I'm looking at with this one. The whole idea is taking something from its bare roots of accessibility and how you can build it up into a bigger idea and a bigger project. And this is done in a very, very sort of simple way, going from simple content creation to building up a little bit more about saying, what can I do next? What's stage 2 or what's stage 3 and so on? How do I move this journey forward? And again, I'm trying to design this in a very user-friendly and with non-expert language. Okay. And that would link into next week's session. So this one's going to be kind of tying up this sort of bigger series of things that I've been doing to celebrate Global Accessibility Awareness Day. So happy day for that one for everyone. Is we're trying to tailor approach for your sector. Now, of course, I can't obviously in an hour session kind of go at depth about obviously someone who's a UX designer or someone who's a web developer or a back-end developer. I can't also do that at length. But the idea is trying to think about, well, actually, where can you focus things, how it might be linked to your responsibility. So during this session, same as I did last time around, it's totally open, totally free for you to ask me anything. Okay. Whole idea is I'm kind of here for you. I'm a tutor with digital accessibility. I work for National Upskill, as you can see there with the background. So I've designed a 2-year apprenticeship course, which is mostly funded, which I'm going to talk a little bit in a little while. And I do loads of short courses as well. So I kind of know a fair bit about digital accessibility. I won't know everything, I'm not going to lie, but I am trying here to help you as best as I possibly can. Linking in with that one, this isn't necessarily a plug as such, but this is the course that I run. I'm the tutor for it and I've led the program. So it's an 18 to 24 month program. Now it's usually 95% government funded. Sometimes a organization, so big organizations, will pay the additional 5% into some big pot of money, and therefore that will go towards any sort of training, and that will bridge that extra 5% gap. Okay, this is only applicable for people in England because it's a UK government apprenticeship. But what that basically means is sometimes the extra 5%, which equates to about £800, is too much for certain organizations to pay. So therefore we do have something called a levy gift. So if you know of a small charity or a small organization who wants to get into this field and wants to have a bit of training in this field, but just can't afford it, we want to hear from them. And that's because we basically have a fully funded place and maybe a couple of places available. And yet we're having real kind of difficulty trying to fill those gaps. So we're basically looking for someone who can benefit from a digital accessibility training. And again, we're thinking small organizations or charities. We're thinking that's obviously where this niche would fit. Ordinarily, they're going to have to cover their own costs, but obviously we can do that this time around, and they might have issues in covering that £800 cost. Okay, so we've tried to appeal on LinkedIn and all the rest of it, but it's very, very hard to kind of give away some training for free, despite what you might think. So we want to try and get people on board as we possibly can do. Okay, even if you are interested in the course yourself, chances are it's going to be a fully funded course for you because you get the 95% government funding and your employer will probably already pay into a pot of money for that 5%. So it will technically already be funded. And if your if your organization doesn't use that funding, it will go straight back to the Treasury. So it's always best for your organizations to use it. All right, but we are trying to look for that gift for someone who doesn't pay into that extra 5% or doesn't pay into that pot, and we can basically pay that that cost for them. Okay, so if you do know anyone, do by all means let me know if you've got anyone, and we're happy to consider anyone. Okay. Um, Another thing we are offering for free as part of the Global Accessibility Awareness Day is we're offering a free 30-minute exclusive consultation. And that could be for anyone if you're looking at in your organization, you're in the L&D department, for example, or in your HR department, even if you're just an individual and you want to kind of like know what you can do to get into the sector or whatever it may well be, get in touch, and then we'll be there for it's a limited to 20 respondents, or the first come first served. So again, if you want me to look at your website, for example, if you want me to scan over it, want to do a test on your website, respond, so put maybe a message in the chat or respond to me on LinkedIn or send me an email, whatever it may well be, and then obviously we'll see what we can do for you on the back of that as well. Right, so there's the plugs over with. Like I said, I think they're good plugs, they're free stuff. So today what we're looking at then is we're looking about accessibility facts and figures for project management. I always like to start sessions with this because it kind of puts things into perspective. Accessible workplaces see 90% increase in employer retention. So it just shows you're a more sympathetic employer. It just shows you're more open, more inclusive. 6% are not convinced on the return of investment for accessibility. These figures go up and down a little bit, and I think unfortunately they've kind of gone up a little bit, where they say actually there are a lot of people who aren't convinced that doing something accessible gives them actually a return on investment. I often say, well, actually, there's about 300 billion pounds a year that's being missed with what's called the purple pound, and this is that spending potential of people with disabilities. So therefore, if someone with a disability can't access your website, then they can't buy things. All right, so it shows that actually it does have a big return on investment. 72% boosting of productivity in accessible workplaces. 11% lack the right skills or people to implement accessibility, which is why we often find it's very, very interesting when I'm offering these courses that actually the first question when we try and sell the course and we say, would you like an apprenticeship for digital accessibility or would you like a short course for digital accessibility? First question is, what's digital accessibility? And these are in some very, very sort of techie backgrounds as well. So you'd think that they would know, but unfortunately they don't. And 43% of organizations have a clear lack of any ownership related to accessibility. So there might be some specific accessibility roles, or sometimes they might be put into a bigger sort of pot. So it might be someone's HR responsibility, it might be someone's diversity and inclusion responsibility. But again, there's the whole idea that kind of links with this idea about that there's a lack of the right skills or the lack of the right people to implement these sorts of things. So it shows that actually there's a lot of areas that should be kind of focused on a lot more in this area. So last time around, this is what we looked at then. So I always said, have a persona or a person in mind when you are designing something. Doesn't matter what it is, whether it's a document, whether it's a graphic, whether it's some e-learning module you're designing, have someone in mind to think, would that person be able to access this particular thing? So I'll show you my persona in a second. But what that will do is it will help you break down the sort of magical five, if you like, or the sort of rule of thumb. These are the text, color, image, sound, and cognition. Now, I'm not going to go through all these at length now, because obviously this was the last session, but I will go into a bit more depth with them anyway. But those are the five main things you should be looking at. So maybe the text, for example, what's the color of the background? Images, have they got alt text? Have you got captions for sound? Cognition, have you considered the readability? So last session, what we looked at was if you have put your text into a readability checker, simply go on Google, type in readability checker, you can put a document in and it will say you need to have maybe you need to be that reading age of a 14-year-old to access this or the reading age of a 15-year-old. If it's anything more than the reading age of a 12-year-old, chances are a good portion of the public won't be able to access or won't be able to fully access that because of their reading age is much lower than a 12-year-old. Okay? Always leave that to sink in a little bit because actually people are very, very surprised. But if you're putting something out there into the public domain, it should be lower than the reading age of a 12-year-old. There are areas where that's a bit more difficult, but as a general rule of thumb. What we're going to start to look at a little bit more today is how your digital content is going to be accessed. Should you be thinking about things going through the phone? Because most people access the internet through their phone nowadays, rather than the web, for example. Or are people listening to your website? So are they using assistive technology, for example, because they're blind or partially sighted? And then prioritization. How do you know where to focus your accessibility efforts? And again, this is always, again, a big issue where people don't know where to start. So most commonly used areas, for example. So where's your high traffic areas? And then you might be finding and fixing on an ad hoc basis. And that's sort of kind of stage one, which we'll be looking at today. So my persona then is Edith. All right, she's a retired civil servant. She's got no perceived disabilities. So what that basically means is she might have certain ailments, she might have certain impairments, for example, but she doesn't consider herself to be disabled. So, like me, for example, I'm partially sighted and I'm also partially deaf. Yet I do not consider myself to be disabled. It's just in certain situations I might need certain extra things that somebody else might not need. So she had to bank online since the pandemic. She lives alone. Recently required to order repeat medical prescriptions online. So this is high blood pressure. Again, not something realistically that will kind of say she's disabled as such. And again, we've seen this an awful lot since the pandemic where people have been pushed a lot more online, kind of against their sort of will, if you like. Um, so she's got a degenerative eye condition from her age, which again is another barrier which people do not consider. So the thing about actually the aged people are people who actually do have additional access requirements. We should be thinking about how they access digital products and so on. She's got reduced cognitive function, also from age, and she's got what we call a low digital literacy, which means that she's actually not that sort of comfortable going online an awful lot. She's not really that comfortable going on different apps and so on, and she's obviously fearful of scams and avoids emails because she thinks that they're just too frequent and she's not sure which to trust. Okay. So whenever I'm designing something, I'm always thinking about Edith. But I think, well, actually, how would she access this? Would she have any issues with it? Now, it's not going to hit all the boxes every single time, but if you're starting off with that sort of idea and that persona, it's always a really good starting point. What I didn't do last session was I mentioned these four letters, WCAG, and that's because people start here in the wrong place, basically. All right. They think, oh, WCAG is mentioned here, it's mentioned there, and it's mentioned there. But actually, if you consider WCAG as your starting point, then you've basically gone too far ahead too quickly, and you're probably going to get scared very quickly, and then you're going to run for the hills. That's not what you want to happen. For those of you who don't know what WCAG is, it's basically the international standard to measure how accessible websites and digital platforms are. Okay. So it's just basically saying this is what sort of gold standard is, if you like. And to do that, they've got the WCAG 2.2, which is one of the latest full guidance. And it's a massive document, which is incredibly difficult to digest, especially if you're a non-expert. Even for some experts, it's incredibly difficult. And you've got your sort of three levels. Level A is basic, level AA is middle, and level AAA is your sort of gold standard, if you like. All right. But the biggest issue with this one is it's not easy to pick up and use. Okay, it's as simple as that. If you've ever been on the website to try and look at the WCAG specifications, it's not easy. You can't pick up and use it, or you can't pick up it and start to kind of develop things for yourself and kind of change things for better accessibility. You have to know what you're looking at. The biggest problem is it's not a sufficient starting point. It's all well and good knowing about it. It's all well and good, obviously, thinking, well, actually, I want to get to that point. It's not a starting point. All right. So that's the one thing I always try and tell people is do not think about WCAG too early. You're probably going to be months and months and months into your accessibility journey before you really start to kind of think about these things. So you've got to start to kind of think about, well, where am I now? Where do I want to go in 6 months' time or 12 months' time? You've got to really start to build it up. It's often meant for industry experts. So everyone has their own responsibility for accessibility, but actually you've got to pick and choose when you access this. It's mistakenly considered as the final word in accessibility, and that's because people falsely assume if you are WCAG compliant means you're accessible. WCAG is a standard. It doesn't mean it makes you a fully accessible employer or a fully accessible organization, for example. Okay, so WCAG is not the be all and end all. It was never meant to be. All right, so it's not their fault. It's just people kind of attach an awful lot to it. So these might be some things that you want to achieve. This is where we start to kind of get into the project management side of stuff. So you might think about, right, do I want to do an internal audit where we check out 10 regularly used web pages? This is what happens. Or what want to look at our LMS, for example, and say, well, actually, how can people access this or do that, for example? And then you might go a little bit further, responsibilities of individuals, developing a policy, training, WCAG, and monitor accessibility. These are very, very, very long-term projects. All right, it might be great to think, yeah, 2 years down the line we can do this, 5 years down the line we can do this. All right, but getting started is always the hard bit that people have problems with. And that's because we need to be looking at this as a bigger organization wide, right? Every single person has their part to play. It's not one person, it's not one department, it's not one process. All right. So accessibility is everyone's responsibility. So what I'm going to do now is going to break it down by individual to try and say, well, actually, these are some responsibilities that these people have and what they can do to get that accessibility done in a much more succinct and better way. In your team, in your organization, you might know of certain people who have these individual responsibilities. So they might be doing authoring, for example, and there's some job titles there for you to have a look at. So content designers, content creators. Coming down, you got designers. They might be user experience researchers, usability analysts. Coming down to development, testing, and admin. So all these people have some part to play for accessibility, right? Some people might think, well, actually, that's probably just 10% of their job. Other people, it might be about 90% of their job. But even so, everyone has something to do with regards to accessibility. Big thing that I teach is that the whole idea is a digital accessibility specialist knows how to work all these individual systems, what each individual person does, and try and kind of give an oversight and say, right, this person maybe could help do this area, or we can develop a policy with this person in order to get this accessibility done better. And the whole idea is that you're kind of like the go-to person to know how you can get the best out of these individuals for that accessibility side of things. So I'm just going to show you a quick little video because with accessibility being everyone's responsibility, sorry, with it being everyone's responsibility, it's worth just kind of having a little watch of this video because actually you've got to realize actually this is what's going on with regards to someone who's accessing your website. All right, it's very interesting when you start to look at these individual people and start to think about also the individual companies and actually some of the issues that they have in being accessible. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a bit of an idea then. Obviously, the idea, what we're trying to achieve there is basically, or rather not to achieve, is something as kind of frustrating as that. So when you think of obviously some of those big companies there, and obviously the issues that they have, is that you'd think, well, actually, realistically, these shouldn't be problems that people are coming up against, but unfortunately, these are things that people do come up with. Um, and on that sort of basis, so Eben has very kindly mentioned that obviously people had issues connecting. So of course the problem is I put the link in and you do it as a hyperlink to make it more accessible. But ironically, that's not obviously what worked. So I do apologize for sort of ringing people kind of during that as well. Obviously, but I just hope that that was allowing people to get some access to us today. So apologies if you have missed the first sort of section of it. As I say, we are recording, so you can go back and have a little look at it. Haven't really missed too much. This is a sort of nitty gritty now where we kind of get into things. Is if you are obviously starting off with your accessibility journey, you might want to be thinking about these four levels. So the fundamentals, awareness, implementations, and reparations. Now, the best way to look at this is that each one of these will be a massive, massive area and project in itself. All right, so we're not expecting you to be able to jump from the fundamentals to the awareness and then right to the very end within the space of 6 months or a year. Accessibility is a journey, it's a process. It's not something that's going to be a quick tick box exercise that's going to happen within the next couple of weeks, for example. Okay. So given obviously this is obviously a free session where obviously what kind of people have joined because they kind of maybe want to get started in this area. I'm going to focus a little bit more on the fundamental side of things, assuming that's where most people are. If you are done all of the fundamentals, congratulations, well done. But I think that there's maybe always areas where people can develop on this, and then I will start to go into the different other areas as well. So what you're going to be doing is you're going to be trying to gather data on where your accessibility journey currently is. All right. So this is a good little way of looking at it. I'm going to give you a little checklist now, and you might think, well, actually, I'm quite good on 2 out of those 6 things in the checklist. So therefore, you can start to think about, right, okay, these are the next things that I need to do. All right. So checklists are really, really good in the being able to actually say, well, okay, this is how they can help, for example. All right. So you might have a bit of a team that has a bit of an understanding. The fact that you guys are on this call, you understand a little bit about digital accessibility is always a good start. You might then start to prioritize where you want to devote your efforts and some finding and fixing, maybe doing an audit at some particular point. Okay. Then you might go on to the awareness side of stuff. Now you're going beyond the basics. You think about the usability of your site. You think about daily workflows and maybe thinking about what each individual in your team maybe has responsibility for accessibility. And then you might start doing some ad hoc testing, right? Again, that's a bit of a stage up again. Next stage, now you're left with deeper, more specific issues to solve, right? You're probably now starting to think about WCAG levels. So for those guys that just joined us, I said the biggest issue that people had is that they thought about WCAG levels too soon. Right? You can see there I've done it at stage 3 out of 4. All right, so we're not expecting you to start jumping in to say, right, okay, we need to be level A compliant or double A compliant or WCAG 2.2 compliant. All right, that's not what it's meant to be about. All right, you get there as a process. So I'm going to start to kind of give you ideas of how you can build up that process and get to that eventual point. And then the final one is you've got the deeper rooted areas. So the less frequented traffic areas. So old blogs, press releases, policy pages, stuff that maybe is very, very low traffic, right? But that's the very sort of end of the journey. Okay, so we're going to be looking at what this first stage is. All right, so it is worth making a note of this. But as I say, this is something just to wash over you. Feel free to go back and rewatch these things. All right, but there is this access checklist. Okay, so it has been around in the accessibility circles. I'm not claiming responsibility or ownership of this one, but it is a real good way that I don't think many people are told about this. Is you have aesthetics, content, cognition, ease of use, settings, and specifics, and I will go through each one of those individually. So with the aesthetics, you're going to be looking at things like text. So font size, is it big enough? Is it 16 pixels as a minimum? All right. So sometimes it may need to be a bit smaller, especially, but you got to think about your website, for example. Is it able to be actually kind of at that sort of minimum, especially if you cannot zoom? All right. Think about that as a function. If you can't zoom, then maybe you want to set it as a 16 minimum. If you can zoom, then maybe you can be a bit flexible with that. Okay. Links clearly underlined. Don't just put it as a color because someone who's colorblind might not be able to see that, but maybe you want to change the color plus do the underline as well. All right, and line height. So for example, you might want to do spacing of 1.5 times. Imagery, do all images have alt text? So does it have a description to go with it? Do any images or text rely on each other for contextual meaning? So if you've got some image with a bit of a context, does the person know that that image links with that particular bit of text? Are they somehow linked? Right, you've got to show actually, is it near to that text that you want to talk about, or is it halfway down the page and therefore doesn't really have that obvious link? So try and think about where things are being placed. This is always a big one. Do images autoplay on a carousel? So if you go onto Eventbrite, which is obviously how you book this site, they have an image carousel going around on their homepage. And when I put the event on, I had the option of adding loads of images that went on a carousel. This is actually quite a bit distracting for people if they've got maybe certain cognitive impairments, for example. So that could maybe be causing a bit of an issue for people. So try and avoid that where we can. Video media. Animations, potentially excessive or fast or distraction or even kind of potentially harmful. So, for example, they could trigger seizures if they're over a certain amount of seconds per frame. Do videos autoplay? I'll be honest, that's one of my big bugbears. So you go on like a recipe website where I was making dinner yesterday, had all these adverts and these things popping up left, right, and center. And I didn't know where they were coming from. And then the button to get rid of them is a tiny, tiny button. And so I was thinking, well, actually, someone who's visually impaired or who's got problems with their dexterity of their fingers, that probably would be almost impossible for them to get. Videos auto loop unnecessarily. So is a video that's constantly on a loop that you can't stop or pause or kind of minimize, for example. So again, trying to kind of restrict all those things that kind of just jump in at people. Color. Avoid using color only to convey meaning. So again, people who are colorblind, they might not be able to see what it is that you are trying to get at just by using color. All right. Sorry, and then videos autoplay and auto loop. Sorry, I've repeated that one. So either way, just the color for that one. Right. So those are just a rule of thumb. Again, not all of them. They are just some ideas for you to think about. Okay. Content. So the text. Check for long bodies of text that can be condensed and moved to other formats. So again, if you just put reams and reams and reams of text on there, is it a high reading age? Is it not broken up? Are there loads of issues that are going to cause people to kind of maybe not access that or not be able to read that as best as you probably would like them to? Are there large pieces of text that are center aligned? Now, if something is center aligned, so it means as you're reading it from left to right, the starting sentence is probably at a jagged sort of diagonal angle. It starts at different points. Now, this for someone who's got a learning difficulty or learning disability, this will throw off their learning process of how they learn to read. If you think about when you learned to read, everything was in a nice, straight, neat line, and you read from the first line, second line, third line. Whereas for them, it just seems as though there's one letter that's over here, another letter starts here. So there were loads of different sort of confusing cues that are kind of throwing off their readability. So just try and keep things left aligned if you possibly can. Scripting content. This one's more for developing web pages. So looking at headings, do they accurately reflect all content? So rather than just saying this is section 1 or this is more info, have you given it an actual title? Have you given it an actual heading? Okay, so the heading structure might be H1 and H2. So it will look a little bit like this. So as you're going through the page, a screen reader picks up, right, okay, this is heading 1, and that's where their screen reader picks it up and starts reading what it is. And then they can tab to the next bit, the next heading, and say, right, this is heading 2 or this is heading 3. So it's a bit like having chapters of a book, if you like, or it might have bullet points, for example. It just gives it a nice sort of breakdown of text, not only for someone who maybe has got a learning difficulty and they kind of get put off by big bodies of text, but also a screen reader. So someone who can't actually see all these breaks in text, it kind of shows where they are for each individual person. And video media. Do any videos contain content that should have captions or subtitles? So the video I showed you there did have those captions, did have those titles. And obviously I was using a third-party website, so YouTube, but I made sure I checked that before I put that onto this particular website. Is the content from videos also provided as a transcript separately? We're not saying this has to be done as a rule of thumb, but again, the idea is, can it be done if you need it to be? Okay, so when I put out the emails for these, I asked if anyone had any additional access requirements. No one did, so therefore that video, I haven't bothered to make a transcript for it, but I would have done if somebody had asked for it. Cognition. So the layout. So good continuity around the site. So if you go from your home page to maybe another page and then another page and another page on the same website, are they having the same sort of flow? So are the menus at the top the same? Is the search bar appearing in the same area? Are there different sort of the main functions? Is the menu kind of roughly the same in every one of them? And this again is kind of bringing it down to that sort of ease of use and making sure it's in a clear, obvious layout. Don't make things more confusing and mess than it kind of really needs to be. Too many features. So these are things that are kind of coming back into fashion almost. So pop-ups had kind of disappeared for quite a while, whereas now they seem to be coming back quite a bit. So you get the little banner at the bottom saying cookies. Can you obviously access these? Will you accept the cookies or whatever else it may well be? So that's fine. Obviously you can click accept, but sometimes that's a keyboard trap for keyboard users. It means that actually they can't actually navigate to it and click on it and to get rid of it. So therefore they can never actually get onto that web page because that cookies banner is unfortunately trapping them and therefore they can't get beyond that. So have a consider about what actually are you asking people to do when you get onto your website. Language, plain language. This is always one that I kind of really start to kind of delve in quite a lot with people. So what I mentioned earlier on, so is it for someone who's 12 years old or less? Can they read it? Is it a readable function for them? Is it actual readable text? Have you avoided jargon, idioms, long sentences, large words? Again, you can't get around this all of the time, but actually has it at least had a considered effect? Right? Is there an easy reader version if need be? So can that actually be provided if you think that might be necessary? A bit more on this one. So overstimulating text, images, and color flashing, distracting or potentially harmful. So something that seems to have become a bit of a thing since COVID is this. So this is something I picked off a website yesterday, and I had to check on this because apparently it's called dopamine colors from a hypersaturated palettes. Some people might not know what that means. I don't. What it basically means is realistically is nice, big, bright, colourful colours to try and hopefully trigger some dopamine and some good feelings. Apparently, it comes from post-COVID when they were trying to get people to feel a lot more happier post-COVID, and therefore websites and colours started to pop up to say, oh, well, why don't we do this and have this colour to make people feel nice and happy when they're on our website? But I mean, this is again very overstimulating, lots of flashing as part of this as well. So again, these could cause seizures if they're teamed with animations, for example. So again, we're not suggesting you make your website dull and boring. Accessibility doesn't have to be that, but we've got to start to consider where we are using them and how we are using them. All right, use them as kind of sparingly as we kind of would like to. All right, ease of use. So again, this is me thinking about my persona. So when I'm thinking about Edith, when I think about she's accessing that website, can she do it where she maybe kind of like can do it quite functionally? Is it actually intuitive? So if I'm talking to someone who's a user experience researcher, for example, they might go on to a website and they say, well, actually, this isn't very intuitive. There's actually not really things where you'd expect them to be. So this is again certain things that we might be thinking about. Um, there might be something where you might want someone to skip to main content. All right. So this is what I mean here. So if someone's using a screen reader, if they use a tab key to move through the different bits of content. So is there a way for them to go straight from the header, which is the bit you see at the top, to go to the navigation pane instead? So where they can choose the different functions, or can they just skip to main content? So what happens is, so if you've got a tab key, if you go on a website, hit the tab key, and there might be certain functions that get focused. Or there might be something which appears in the top left-hand corner which says skip to main content. If you're able to do that, you're probably onto a winner. You're probably onto quite a good website. If, however, you go onto a website, you hit the tab key and the functions are all over the place and it's not in a logical order, it might jump from the beginning of the navigation to the end of the navigation, or it might jump from one story to another in a non-logical order, then there's going to be issues with that particular website. And that brings us to the next one, clear focus. Is it clear where a user's focus is if it's using a keyboard? So if we look at focus order tests, so for example, realistically, this one here, it should start from the top and then work its way down. So every time you hit the tab key, it will start at the top, tab key, go down one, tab key, go down another one. That's what focus order text should be. Now that needs to obviously means coded correctly to go from that one to that one to that one to that one. However, sometimes it might jump around because they haven't been coded properly. So therefore, that would cause an issue for someone who's just using a keyboard, who therefore could not use a mouse. So therefore, we've got to consider, are these things being done? Something as very, very simple as a quick tab key test. Go onto a website, go onto your website. Can you do that? Can you do the tab key test? Does it pass? If not, you've already kind of started to realize, well, actually, we should maybe think about this. The settings. When you go onto a website, your website, try zooming in to 200% or maybe even 300% or 400%. Is everything remaining on that page? Or do you have to scroll from left to right? If you're scrolling from left to right, someone who's got macular degeneration or who's got visual impairments, they might only be looking at your website through what is classed as maybe a tiny lens. So they might see only a very, very small circle on your screen. Everything else is black. So therefore, if they've zoomed in to 200, maybe 300%, and they have to scroll from left to right, it's incredibly difficult for them to be able to follow the text. So what I suggest you might want to do is get an empty toilet roll, have a look through your website on 200, 300, or 400%, and see whether you can actually follow the text. If you've got to scroll from left to right whilst holding the toilet roll, there's going to be an issue there with you, okay? Because you can't realistically follow the text very well when you've actually got to be zoomed in so high if you've got that particular macular degeneration. Can the site be used with forced color modes or Windows high contrast mode, which is this one? So there is a function within Windows where you can go in and change the contrast. So a lot of the apps have this now where it's obviously dark mode or light mode. Windows has its own function for that. Have a look on your website or your maybe LMS or your other sort of software that you might be using. How does your software, your website look in a high contrast mode? I've tried it many, many, many times, and it doesn't always work. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. If it doesn't actually work in that particular function, then again, you've highlighted that there might be an issue that you might need to work on. Third party site or service. So I mentioned a little bit there about me using YouTube. So I went on there, I had to make sure that I checked what it was that they were doing and make sure they had subtitles or captions or whatever it may well be to make sure, because that was my responsibility because I decided to use it. Some people kind of do it in a slightly different way. So whenever we've tried marketing the courses that we offer, so we say to people, well, we do a digital accessibility course. It's a 95 to 100% government funded course. You don't really need to pay for it. Um, but they say to us, oh, well, it doesn't matter because we've got the WordPress plugin or we've got the Accessibility overlay. And these are things that are coming around quite often and quite frequent now. It's something that looks like this. So it sounds like an incredibly good idea and a quick fix. The idea is that you pay a company to add something onto your website, and therefore, whenever someone's got any accessibility issues, they can click on the little function down at the bottom, little button down at the bottom, and they can specify with a toggle key on or off whether they want this high contrast mode or whether they want fewer animations. It sounds lovely, sounds great. But unfortunately, these at best will pick up 30% of accessibility errors. The one particular company, which is what that widget is that I've shown you there, that's called Accessibility, and they've just been sued $1 million for falsely advertising that they will be 100% accessible. So they were fined for falsely claiming that they could make any website accessible. And that is because they use AI, they use loads of other functions and add-ons and text and coding that doesn't always work. At best, it covers 30%. Okay. Now, it's not just my word for it. There are many, many, many different articles, there's different websites out there that show that these things just do not work. All right, they're not worth the money. They're really, really not. Okay. You might think I'm in the sector, I'm being biased and so on, but just do a quick Google search for yourself, choose two or three different websites, read two or three articles, and you'll see the scale of the problem that we're talking about. All right. You can't get over the human factor when it comes to accessibility. It's as simple as that. And specifics. All right, conducting your own simple tests. All right, so I've already mentioned there about doing the tab key test, for example, or the high contrast mode test. These are very, very simple, quick functions that you can do. All right, you don't have to be an expert in any of these fields to do any of these things. One thing I would suggest that you do is you can download NVDA. Many of you may have heard about it. It's a screen reader, totally free to download. It's a text-to-speech software. So this is probably one of the most commonly used accessibility softwares. So this is how most people will listen to your website, right? So they're not obviously viewing it, they're listening to it, and that's how they will go onto that particular website as well to say that's how actually that this sort of text should actually kind of feature. Sometimes these things don't always kind of appear as they probably should do. So therefore, do your own test, download this free piece of software, and start to see how maybe a user looks at your website or uses your piece of software. It does take a bit of getting used to, I will be honest with you, but do persevere with it, even just a little bit, and then you start to see what I'm talking about. Another one you might want to do is the headings map. So this is an extension, a browser extension, which you can get on Firefox and Chrome. So again, they're free to download. And what this will do, again, any website, it will highlight where the headings are. So if I show, when I went back to you, so about the headings 1, headings 2, headings 3, to make sure things are in a logical order. So maybe we're going from top to bottom, or we're going from left to right. This will highlight where those headings are. So it should show you headings 1, headings 2, headings 3, headings 4 in a logical order as you might read it or as you might look at it. All right. This is a good little add-on to be able to show how those things are appearing. Because if you're not savvy with code and looking at things for testing in sort of in depth, this is a great little user-friendly tool to be able to do it. So those were the fundamentals. Okay. So I'll just quickly go back for you. So that was the access, ACCESS. All right. So again, those are your starting point. Now, I'm going to pause there just for a second because before I go on to the next bit, because you've got to realize there's an awful lot there in that fundamentals area. So that's the reason why I've focused on this one more so and giving you more tools in this area, because most people will be at that stage and they will be at that stage for a very long period of time. That's no bad thing. Okay, the idea is there are some major things there that even if you get one or two of those right, such as the aesthetics and the cognition, you are probably doing 90% better than many other organizations and individuals out there. So therefore, doing just some of these basic things makes a massive difference to a lot of people. Right? And again, it just shows actually you can make these sort of inroads to get further on in that journey. And having this as a checklist shows that you can start somewhere and you've got a route where you're going and where you're heading. The worst thing is kind of not knowing where to start and not knowing where you're going. This hopefully does give you that bit of a starting point. So awareness, again, I'm not going to delve too much into these because I don't think this is where people are. And again, if I went too far into this, I'd probably scare you. So the idea is more on fundamentals, fewer on these other areas. So you go beyond the basics, you're looking at the usability. You might want to test where automated tests do not exist. So again, you might do a quick overview test. So there might be a website which does a quick scan of your website, but the awareness area is looking at more fundamental and deep-rooted areas. Again, building daily workflows, you might have a code of practice. So there are certain people that I work with in accessibility circles where they are creating how-to guides for some of their new starters that start in their organization in certain departments to say, right, you should be doing this. So I know there's a few people with it from them in the public sector, for example, on the call. So I know they have a lot of guidebooks, for example, or like a how-to guide on how to do certain things. If you do want to go further into this area, TPGI are very good in this sector. They've got what is called inclusive design principles. They've got two very handy documents. So one of them being a very small poster, which is what you can see there, the seven areas. Another one is a bit more in depth. So if you want more of an in-depth how-to guide on to achieving these 7 areas, they do have those available as well if you do want to get hold of those. So make a note of that, TPGI, so TPGI, Inclusive Design Principles, if you are wanting to go a bit further. But again, do remember, this is a bit further on down your journey. Don't be scared if you're not there yet. Go back to the fundamentals. Implementation. All right, so this is where you got much deeper specific issues. So rather than working on the basic fundamentals, you've maybe got issues where you've done user testing with people who have disabilities or accessible needs, and you've highlighted these issues with your forms, for example, or with your payment methods, for example, or your e-commerce site. All right, you've got very, very specific things you want to work towards. Again, this is somewhere where you're going to be looking maybe at WCAG at this particular point, because you know you've worked the fundamentals, you've gone into the awareness bit, you start to think about going into level A, maybe you want to do double A, and these might be certain bigger organizations like the public sector, for example. All right. They do routine testing and they've got design systems which have accessibility in mind from the ground up. All right. Having accessibility from the get-go is always very difficult. All right. If you are at that stage, it's really, really good. One thing you can do at this point, which again is very, very cautious for me to suggest you do, is you go onto AxeCore. This will do a very in-depth test on most websites, for example, and it will pick up, as it says there, 57% of WCAG issues, and it claims to pick them up. And now it says pick them up, it means it kind of highlights where they are. Okay, doesn't mean it's going to fix them for you. The idea is it's kind of highlighting where those issues are. Again, the reason why I say I'll treat this with caution is because I don't want people to do this too soon, right? So I don't want people to do this too soon because it's just going to throw them off. It's going to scare them. It's going to make people run away. All right. Don't do these things too soon. Which again definitely means for the next one as well. All right. Don't concern yourself too much with old blogs or press releases or policy pages or older campaigns, because again, these are things that are not high traffic. You want to concern yourselves with the things that people use most frequently and therefore might have the most issues accessing most frequently. Another website which you can use to do a deep scan, which again, treat with caution. Don't do it unless you want to be aware of what it is and kind of treat it with kid gloves, is Expert. I never really know how to say it, if I'm honest with you. It's the E on the end that throws me. But again, this will do a very, very deep scan once you've typed in the URL for your particular page. All right. It will spit out a report at the end to say these are the errors that you've got. All right. It will take quite a while for it to trudge through your entire website, depending on how small or how big it is, but it will bring you out a score at the very end. Again, this is a score which can scare an awful lot of people. So therefore, kind of just do it only really if you want to, if you're curious, but don't take it as being that's everything. I need to fix all those issues, because that's definitely not what you can be doing with this. Okay. So, in a nutshell, you've got your 4 areas. These are your how you might be achieving your accessibility aims in a very, very long-term view, going from short-term to long-term. All right. So there's your fundamentals. So you're gathering your data, you're prioritizing, you're finding, and you're fixing. Again, this is the longer, bigger stage that you're probably going to be at. All right, because working from the ground up, maybe as a small team, will be something which is obviously very hard for people to do. All right, but do persevere. Pick off the little bits, and again, you'll be doing an awful lot more than most of the people are doing. Your awareness, you're going beyond the basics. You're maybe doing daily workflows. You're testing more frequently, for example. Again, that's the next stage. Again, probably there for a bit longer again. Then your implementation, deeper issues, WCAG levels, going to your final level. This is where you've got maybe your lower traffic areas, which you're starting to look at. All right. So those are your 4 areas you want to think about. And then you're going back to the access. All right. Aesthetics, content, cognition, and so on and so forth. All right. But like I say, those are things which you can think about to have a look at. But again, rewatch the video to go back and have a look at them. They aren't the be all and end all. All right. With access, I've shown you a very, very small snippet of what is out there. All right. We are able to go into a lot more detail, but obviously this is only a 90-minute session. So, which is where the shameless plug comes into this. So, National Upskill, we do offer courses on this one. There are a range of courses. There is a long apprenticeship, which is IAAP professionally recognised. That's an 18 to 24-month program. All right, so that is only available to people in England, I'm afraid. But we do offer 3 other courses. All right, so if you want a 6-week accelerated course, which is built from the IAAP course, you've also got that available. There's a tailored program where there's a choice of 7 modules. So you might want to just tailor, I want to just do these 4 areas or these 5 areas. We can work with you to tailor a program as well. Or if you're maybe just getting started, you can think about one of our half-day or full-day workshops. So these are very, very flexible. All of these programs are incredibly flexible. We'll work with you on a one-to-one basis to make sure we know what it was that you want, where you want to go, and what you want to learn. All right. And I will say, I can hand on heart say these are incredibly affordable. I've seen some incredibly eye-watering costs for accessibility training. Um, that's not us. All right. We need to make sure that accessibility is being able to be accessible. So therefore, we need to make sure learning about accessibility is accessible as well. Okay. And that works with budgets. So we want to make sure we're doing the best as we can for everyone as best as we possibly can. Okay. So if you are interested, then by all means, just send me an email or whatever later on. But you are free to ask me anything at all. Whilst you do that, I'm just going to quickly go back to the beginning. So if you are having any questions, then you can type it in. But I'm just going to quickly go back, and for some of the people who weren't here at the beginning of the call, I'm just going to show a couple of things because I do need a bit of this is a bit of a plea for people. So we've got our apprenticeship, which is sometimes out of kind of reach for certain small organizations because they've got to pay a 5% charge for it. 95% government funded for the apprenticeship, but sometimes paying that additional 5% is unachievable for certain people. So it equates to £800. So that's for an organization or maybe a small charity, maybe. These are based in England, but we do have a gift where that cost is being taken care of and we are basically covering that cost. All right. So if you do know any small organizations or any small charities in England who maybe could benefit from digital accessibility training, do let us know. We've basically got this very, very reputable industry recognized qualification, which is basically going up for grabs. All right. We want to try and get it out to where it's needed. All right. It's been proving very, very tricky to find someone, which again is bizarre to me. But again, if you know a small organization or a small charity who would benefit from some training and they have to be based in England, then do let me know. Okay. Put them in touch with me. We will consider anyone and everyone. Another thing you might want to think about is because of Global Accessibility Awareness Week, we are offering free 30-minute consultations. So please get in touch. So put something in the chat bar, email, whatever it may well be. See me on LinkedIn. If you want a free exclusive consultation, if you want me to look over your HR system, your L&D system, whatever it may well be. If you're a web developer, I will do a quick consultation with you. First 20 respondents, first come, first served. But again, we're offering that as a kind of like an open to all session. And again, we'll kind of see what sort of things we can do for you as a result of that as well. Okay. But in a nutshell, that is basically everything. So I want to now pass it over to you guys. So if you do want to ask any questions, I'm going to be here obviously for the next 15-20 minutes, however long it will be. We do have the session online. Be added onto YouTube as well. So I'll send you the link out later on for that one as well. But then other than that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. You can go back to any point in the session if you want to, but I'll leave it up to you guys now. And again, apologies for connection issues. Unfortunately, it seems to be a growing trend, which I can't quite get over. Liz, yeah, go ahead. Feel free to put your mic on or you can type in.
Hi, thanks, Barry. That was a really interesting session. One of the things that we struggle with at our organisation is third-party products that are often off the shelf. There is a limited scope to bespoke these things, and working in the digital team, we're aware of the need to procure accessible products, but the team who has actually procured a product, it's not on their radar. It's not something that is a priority for them. What steps can you take? I appreciate that a lot of that is probably around the points you made at the start about accessibility being everyone's responsibility and having that sort of universal approach to it and getting everyone on board. What are the sort of practical steps that you can take to try and stop that from happening in the future?
Yeah, great question. So other than obviously doing the training, which is probably out of your remit, so obviously we've got to think about actually what are the practical steps, like you say. Realistically, what you need to be looking at are two things. There's something called a VPAT, VPAT, or an ACR. These are conformance reports. What these are, it's used in the public sector an awful lot.
Yeah.
What that happens is obviously with the public sector, they have to put out a tender for someone who offers them a digital service, for example. But what they will do is they'll make it contractually obliging for that developer to make sure it has this, this, and this. Okay. So
Yeah.
therefore, it's making sure that when you set out the specifications, it's got that contractual link to it. It's got that make sure that say, well, you want this to it, you want this element to it, you want this element to it. All right, so they are probably the best ways to look at it. All right, so
Yeah.
I'd suggest that you do a quick little Google search on it. So, like I say, VPAT, so VPAT, Voluntary Product Accessibility Template, I think,
Okay.
and then the ACR, Accessibility Conformance Reports.
Right.
So there are loads of templates out there for it. Now, I'll be honest with you, they are not, again, a bit like the WCAG, it's not a pick up and easy use. All right.
Yeah.
But again, it's at least a starting point.
Yeah.
But again, hopefully that might give you a bit of an idea to think about how you might be able to steer this a little bit better
Yeah.
and have a bit more of an idea with it. But by all means, if you want to put in for a free 30-minute consultation with me, I'm more than happy to have a little chat with you. If it goes over the 30 minutes, I'm not that fussed if I'm honest with you. Um, so send me an email after this if you want to, set up something, and then obviously you can kind of maybe go into a bit more detail because I realize obviously there's different forums for this and so on.
Yeah.
But by all means, yeah, I'm more than happy to help you with that one because it's a problem that many other people have. You're
Yeah.
not the only one in that boat, trust me. And again, obviously people are trying to do the right thing, but they often don't know how to, or
Yeah.
they don't have a lot of control over it. So yeah, I
Yeah.
definitely feel your pain, but I think there are ways forward for you.
Great. Thanks very much for that, Barry. Appreciate
All
it.
right. Yeah, so get in touch. Okay.
Thanks.
Thanks very much. All right. Eben, have you got anything you want to ask a question on? No, I guess no. Thanks, Evan. I think you need to get in touch. Okay.
Thanks, Barry.
Thanks so much.
Thanks. Bye.